are watching The World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the headlines we're tracking at the moment. Iran launched nearly 200 missiles at Israel on Tuesday, an attack that resulted in limited damage and one casualty, but further raised the temperature in the Middle East. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu has said Iran made a big mistake with the missile attack. Oil prices rose on Wednesday on fears conflict in the Middle East could turn into a wider war and disrupt oil supply from the key producing region after Iran fired ballistic missiles at Israel. In the US, Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz and Republican J.D. Vance are debating each other in New York City. It's the biggest face-off of their political careers. India has been a trusted partner in Jamaica's development journey, and it is ready to share expertise in a range of areas, including digital public infrastructure, biofuel innovation, and help with the Caribbean nation. Prime Minister Modi said after holding wide-ranging talks with the Jamaican Prime Minister, Andrew Holness. Lieutenant Commander Rupa A. from Puducherry and Lieutenant Commander Dilna K. from Calicut of the Indian Navy are embarking on a grueling sailing expedition around the globe that will see them navigating around 40,000 kilometers over 8 months, braving high seas, extreme weather conditions, and 3 Great Capes. Justin Trudeau, Canada's Prime Minister, has survived a second parliamentary confidence motion in less than a week after opposition parties vowed to keep his minority Liberal government alive for now. South Korea showcased a ballistic missile capable of carrying an 8-ton warhead and featured a flypast of a US bomber at military parades in Seoul, a show of force now held annually to signal readiness to respond to North Korean threats. Artificial intelligence-driven demand for electricity is fueling a grid investment boom in Asia. Renewable energy output is growing enormously every year. In fact, nearly a third of the global electricity supply came from clean sources in 2023. Well, our big focus, Iran launched nearly 200 missiles at Israel on Tuesday, an attack that resulted in limited damage and one casualty, but further raised the temperature in the Middle East. Israel intercepted many of the missiles, and Prime Minister Netanyahu said Iran made a mistake and will pay for it. Iran's attack, though, follows weeks of Israeli offensive against Tehran-backed Hezbollah, marked most recently by a limited ground invasion into Lebanon and the assassination of the group's leader. As far as the reactions from around the globe are concerned, well, the United Kingdom has condemned Iran's attack on Israel. Biden, meanwhile, has said there's a complete failure playing out in the Middle East. Germany has demanded that Iran end its missile attack on Israel, expressing fears that the escalation in the fighting could fuel further conflict. In fact, that is a fear many share currently. Listen in to what the Israeli Prime Minister had to say, followed by the US President's reaction.
איראן עשתה ערב טעות גדולה, והיא תשלם על כך. המשטר באיראן לא מבין את נחישותנו להגן על עצמנו ואת נחישותנו לגמול לאויבינו. אלה שלא מבינים זאת, הם יבינו. נעמוד בכלל שקבענו. מי שתוקף אותנו, אנחנו תוקפים אותו. זה נכון בכל מקום כשאנחנו נלחמים בציר הרשע. זה נכון ליהודה ושומרון, זה נכון לעזה, ללבנון, לתימן, לסוריה, וזה נכון גם לאיראן. אנחנו נלחמים בציר הרשע.
At my direction, the United States military actively supported the defense of Israel, and we're still assessing the impact. But based on what we know now, the attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. And this is testament to Israeli military capability and the U.S. military. It's also a testament to intensive planning between the United States and Israel to anticipate and defend against the brazen attack we expected. Make no mistake, the United States is fully supportive of Israel.
There's around 180 ballistic missiles were fired from Iran towards Israel during this major wave of attacks. We know that emergency service alerts were sent out very quickly to people's mobile phones, telling them to get into their shelter and to remain there, as 3 or 4 major waves of attacks took place, with multiple messages coming up on people's phones informing them of the locations. The Israeli Defense Force says there were some impacts, including here in Tel Aviv, where we saw flashes of light as some of those missiles landed, and also large explosions ringing out across the city. But the latest information we have is that there were no Israeli casualties in all of this, and they are putting that down to the fact that around 10 million people across this country heeded that warning and remained in the shelter as this attack took place. We are also hearing from the United States that they worked closely with their Israeli counterparts to try and intercept as many of these missiles as they could. We understand 2 US warships took part, as well as fighter jets in the sky, intercepting them as they arrived. Right now, the big question remains around what will happen next. Certainly many of the signals that we are hearing out of the Israeli Defense Force is that some sort of response is coming. We have a statement which I can read to you just briefly, saying Iran's attack is a severe and dangerous escalation, according to the IDF, and there will be consequences. We will respond wherever, whenever, and however we choose, in accordance with the directive of the government of Israel. A clear sign there that Israel does plan to respond directly against Iran for this ballistic missile attack. And that, of course, then throws open the very concerning question around whether this causes a wider war right across West Asia. In Tel Aviv, Trent Murray, NDTV.
Well, I must also inform you that the United States fired about a dozen interceptors at Tuesday's barrage of Iranian ballistic missiles fired at Israel. This is what the Pentagon has said. In fact, Joe Biden said the US actively supported Israel's defense at his direction. He said he spent the entire morning in the Situation Room at the White House for handling serious national security issues. But the Israeli military said about 180 missiles were fired at Israel, most of which were intercepted. Well, for further clarity, we have with us Iran analyst Reza Khanzadeh joining us, who's also a Middle East expert. Thanks so much, Reza, for making time for us as always. At this point, is it undeniable that allies of Israel in Washington are advocating for a muscular response to the attacks, and that the strike will serve to raise, not lower, the temperature in the Middle East as fears of a wider regional war mount?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think your assessment is accurate. There are plenty of players and actors within Washington, D.C. that want to see an escalation between Israel and Iran. The amount of individuals or parties, if you will, that would rather see diplomacy play out and would rather see de-escalation play out, fare quite a same number, but they don't have the strength as their counterparts in DC does. And what that is going to lead to is just a continued tit for tat, a continued escalation, and Iran and Israel will essentially speak the same language in the sense of saying this is self-defense, this is going to be a counter to a foreign entity attacking us. We must defend our homeland, and appeasing to their domestic base, but also their foreign allies. So for Israel, for example, it would be obviously the United States, and for Iran, it would be their axis of resistance, so to speak. But for the time being, and there's still a lot unknown, but for the time being, it does look like this is going to escalate to a much more severe tit for tat between the two countries, and it could draw in other regional actors as well. Because unfortunately, at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any calm heads at the table right now when it comes to decisions as far as retaliation.
Reza, a former US State Department spokesperson has said on record that Iran responded emotionally rather than strategically. Do you agree, and can we now expect a muscular response from Israel within the next few days?
Well, to answer the first part, I don't agree with that assessment. I don't believe it was emotional, because the last time that Iran countered or responded to an Israeli attack was back in April. So that was months ago, and since then there's been breaches of Iran's national security by Israel and other actors as well, and Iran has not retaliated for the sole purpose because they know that this is going to escalate fairly quickly, especially with Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu essentially wanting this escalation.
Yes.
For years, if not decades, Netanyahu has been trying to trick Iran into a more direct and, if not regional war, and also wanting to draw in the United States. Now, as far as the second part of your question, Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu has publicly stated that there will be a retaliation at the time and place of their choosing, which is something they've always said in the past, and they have acted on it. Case in point was in April. Now they're saying it's going to be much stronger, or as you said it, more muscular, which I do not doubt. As far as the military analysts that I've spoken with, that does seem to be the case. Now the only question is, when will that be? That still remains to be seen. But like I said before, if and or when Israel does strike Iran, then Iran will have to respond, and then that's just going to be a continued back and forth between the two countries until it does escalate to a point of no return, unless by some miracle, really the only actor that can stop this is the United States, and that's by placing a bit more restrictions on Israel, because at this point, Israel, ever since October of 2023, Israel has had a blank check, and the United States, or in particular, Joe Biden, the president, Joe Biden has turned a blind eye to all the atrocities that Israel has done in Gaza, in the West Bank, and now as we look towards Lebanon, so really it's up to the United States, Washington D.C., and unfortunately they're not going to do anything because they're in the middle of a presidential election season.
But it is
and
factoring as a
they
huge
don't-
topic. In fact, even at the vice presidential debate, the opening topic was the Middle East. Meanwhile, analysts are warning that for Israel, this could be an opportunity to hit Iran in ways that it was never able to until now. But thank you so much, Reza, as always, for making time for us and joining us with your views. We also have with us currently Alan Sorensen joining us from northern Israel. Alan, what is the situation where you are currently?
No, I'm now in the northern part of Israel, actually at a point where soldiers are assembling or gathering to be taken to the northern border in order to take part in this land invasion of southern parts of Lebanon. And while driving here, Israel was attacked from Iran, and what I saw I saw a lot of missiles in the air being shot down, some of them being shot down, some of them flying over Israel. And at that time, in the end, I ended up here, entering this shelter behind me. I was stuck with I entered the shelter with around 20 Israeli soldiers and civilians. And we heard loud explosions over all this area. And before that, I was taken by surprise by the attack before I came here, and I had to lie down next to the road. And I saw a lot of other Israelis lying down as well, because they were taken by surprise. This was a very comprehensive Iranian attack that came a lot faster than the previous Iranian attack in April, because at this time missiles, long-range missiles were fired at Israel, and not drones and missiles. Drones take a longer time to reach their aim, but this time it was missiles, and they reached Israel within a matter of minutes.
Well, Alan, please stay safe. But having warned of severe consequences for Iran over any direct military attack on Israel, Washington is now being pressed on what happens next. Was Israel expecting this attack from Iran, given reports were suggesting US intelligence warned Israel of an imminent attack?
During this day, yes. I started hearing rumors around midday, around noontime, that something would be happening. But I didn't know what. And then later on in the afternoon, some American outlets, they started talking about a possible Iranian attack. And after that, the Israeli army spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, he himself went on live TV and said that Israel expected an attack from Iran. And that is what happened later on this evening. So Israel was prepared, and Israel's allies, especially the United States, were prepared as well. And it seems that most of the around 200 missiles that were fired from Iran on Israel were either shot down or they didn't hit their targets. But I must say that some rockets or some missiles, they actually inflicted damage in the area of Tel Aviv, also in an area in southern Israel. And the latest I hear is that a Palestinian have died in the city of Jericho near the Dead Sea, in the northern part of the Dead Sea, because of fragments that fell down from either from the missile or some of the missiles that shot the Israeli missiles that are shooting down the Iranian missiles. He was actually killed, this Palestinian in Jericho, from the fragments falling down from this missile.
Right. Meanwhile, Alan, we are hearing of celebrations breaking out on the streets of Tehran after Iran's missile barrage against Israel. In fact, Iran's UN ambassador in New York has just justified his country's missile attack, saying it acted in self-defense. We have heard this before, but Mr. Netanyahu has vowed to make Iran pay. How might Israel retaliate? What are you picking up on currently?
No, I see Israel going all out and hitting back. I don't know when they will hit back on Iran, but I definitely think that they will hit back. And they, according to Israeli politicians and also the army spokesman, Israel will retaliate on Iran. But what they will hit, we don't know. Regarding the land offensive or the land invasion, ground invasion of the southern part of Lebanon, I think Israel has been cautious from the beginning, and they are moving in step by step, not in huge numbers of soldiers, because they don't want mass casualties on their own side.
Right.
But from what I see tonight, I think that what we have seen today is just the beginning, because Israel is assembling a huge number of reserve soldiers. Between 100 and 200,000 reserve soldiers has been called in. And while I was driving from the Jerusalem area to this northern part of Israel, there were huge queues on the highway. Mostly, some of them were civilians, of course, but many of the cars were either parents carrying their sons to the north in order to let them assemble here so they can be taken to the border and eventually be sent into Lebanon. So there's a huge mass of soldiers being beefed up here along the border with Lebanon, and they expect in the coming few days to be actively fighting inside Lebanon.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for joining us with that update. Do stay safe. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates from northern Israel. Meanwhile, oil prices surged after Iran fired ballistic missiles against Israel, sparking fears of a wider conflict in the Middle East that could disrupt oil supplies. Brent crude, a key benchmark for oil prices internationally, rose more than 1% to $74.40 a barrel. Well, news and updates continue in a moment right after this very short break. Don't go anywhere.
Is that there will be millions of people currently watching this debate. There's still about another 4 or 5 minutes left to run on it, but already we've heard plenty of topics talking about the Iran attack on Israel earlier today, but also focusing on more domestic issues like the economy, abortion, and immigration. Really, so far, in many ways, J.D. Vance, the Republican, the running mate of Donald Trump, has seemed more at ease. He's been able to go on the attack, while Tim Walz has been largely on the defensive, having to defend Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's administration over the last 3.5 years. He hasn't seemed quite as at ease, and he's had some moments where he has become quite hot-headed, perhaps not keeping his cool as much as J.D. Vance has done. However, he has dug into policy much more than J.D. Vance, who so far has made a whole range of rather sweeping statements. A couple of times he's even been fact-checked by the moderators who, in advance of this debate, said that they would not do so. But certainly a whole range of topics that they've managed to get through so far tonight.
Well, Nick, as always, thanks so much for joining us with the latest lowdown from Ground Zero. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates. With that, we're slipping into a very short break. Thank you so much for investing your time in watching this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.